Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our top shelf Bunnehaven distillery tasting for tonight. This is probably our most ambitious tasting. We've got about 10 grand worth of whiskey if you were to buy all six. A lot of these are from auction sites and whatnot, and either sold out or just unattainable right now. So it's been quite special tonight that we actually get to sit down with six of these whiskies. Before we dive into it, as per my email, I recommended might as well open all six. Emma, if you don't mind pasting the tasting order in. Some of these whiskies are 30, 36, 40 years old. Let's let them breathe in your glasses. So if you get your six glasses ready, Emma will paste up the order there. Just for those who are tuning in a bit later and watching the recording, we're going to start with a Bona 30-year-old, then the 40-year-old, then the Faish Oloroso Cask Finish 33-year-old, then the Independent Bottling 1987 30-year-old, then the 1980, I have no idea how to pronounce it, Canasta Cask 36-year-old, and then finishing with the Faish 2012 Tokay 18-year-old, because that's, I believe, a Moyne, so peated whiskey at the end to finish up. Before you dive into your six, I did say, I don't know, for me, I always like to have a warming up palate whiskey. The first whiskey otherwise always, gets a bit of palate. Strain. So if you've got other whiskies, an ex-bourbon cask always goes down well. I've actually decided to crack it open in Spring Bay. It's my welcome dram. I don't know, what's everyone else's starting dram? Spring Bay as well? Emma?
Myself a little Spring Bay bourbon cask. So, cheeky fresh boy.
All right. Well, let's consider our palates sufficiently warmed. Emma, do you want to kick us off with the Bunnahabhain 30-year-old?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously we're going right into it, guns a-blazing, with the Bunnahabhain 30-year-old. So this is one that I was pretty shocked existed. It's obviously older age statement Bunnahabhains are, not something you see super often down at your regular bottle-o. But it actually was part of the core range, and it's matured solely in ex-sherry casks. So it is classic Bunnahabhain sherry vibes, and small batch distilled. It is definitely one of the two older age statements that we're trying. But, obviously we all love our whiskey here, but it's always good to go back into the history of the distillery, and why we love this absolutely bloody unpronounceable distillery so much. And I think it's the bane of my existence working with this brand is having to mispronounce Gaelic words for like the rest of forever. And I do try my best, but they make it really difficult for me. Bunnahabhain means mouth of the river. You've got the Margadale River where their water source is, right on the Sound of Isla. So the little bridge of water that separates them from the mainland and from the other islands. Built in 1881. It was a Victorian style distillery. So, when we talk about like Victorian style distilleries, a lot of the ones that you'd probably most think of are like Edradour, just like cute little adorable distilleries with the thatched roofs, and stuff like that. So Bunnahabhain was built to be bigger, and it's been renovated quite a few times throughout its life. So it is quite a high volume capacity distillery compared to a lot of other distilleries that were built during the same era. And one of its first parent companies was a brand called Edrington, a company called Edrington, who own Glenrothes and Macallan and Highland Park now. And kind of the key connecting thing between all of those is sherry casks. So the love affair with sherry casks and why there's so much full maturation sherry old age statement Bunnahabhain is coming from that influence of the previous owners, really imparting that wisdom and those connections with a lot of bodegas in Spain. So it's yeah, the unpeated distillery on Isla wasn't until 1997 that they finally caved and started to make peated whiskey. But if anyone was joining us for our tasting with the master blender, Julianne Fernandez, we know that there's not going to be as much peated whiskey coming out of Bunnahabhain. It's just not as in high demand. You know, they don't really do a lot with it except for older age statement, cool, you know, interesting releases as Moyne. So it's not pronounced Moyne. I like to say it as Moyne because it reminds me of the seagull and Finding Nemo. And I think that's something all Australians can enjoy. You know, you can get a bit of Kath and Kim vibe in there. But yeah, so Moyne's the name for peated Bunnahabhain. It is heavily peated to a regular kind of Isla standard around 38 to 40 ppm. But one thing that I found really interesting, because Bunnahabhain's such a large distillery, they've had a lot of money invested into them over the years. They don't run at full capacity. They've only started running closer to like 80% capacity nowadays. But when Kaulila nearby closed down for visitor center renovations, they actually outsourced making peated spirit to Bunnahabhain. So they contract distilled is kind of the term we use. So in the next 10 years, we'll probably be seeing a lot of Johnny Walker blends that actually have Bunnahabhain whiskey in them as well, which is kind of cool. Not that, you know, I'd be going out and nabbing a bottle just because of that, but I think it'll be really interesting to see if there is a flavor difference between the two, because they're quite similar. But yeah, so obviously 30-year-old rich sherry is going towards that kind of drier style that you get as Bunnahabhain ages, but I would absolutely love to hear the tasting notes you guys have on this, because I'm very excited about it.
Because it's such an intimate tasting, if you just want to tell us your tasting notes, feel free to unmute yourself and let us know what you feel. I'll just throw it into the comments. Don't feel you need to rush these whiskies as well. Let some time to breathe. I'm going to leave a little bit in all my glasses and come back at the end and try it again. But for me, it's that classic sherried Bona taste that you get from the 18 with like the volume turned on and how like refined and decadent it is. That's how I would describe this.
I mean, like all of these whiskies have had their own lifetime. They're all old enough to drink themselves. So, you know, they're not necessarily things you need to rush through. I really showing my age a bit here, but there's only one whiskey on this tasting that I'm older than, which is horrifying.
Very strong on the kind of raisins and dried fruits, strong flavors like that, the Christmas fruits.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of, you know, when you get baklava and they've shoved the whole clove in the middle of the baklava. Is that like, yeah, orangey, clovey, nutty aroma.
I was worried with it being such an older whiskey, and you know, this is, I think, the choice of cask and the caliber of cask. It's 46.3% ABV, but I was hoping, like, I was worried actually that it may have felt a bit tired, but I'm getting back on my second sip some rich, vibrant sultanas, or I don't know, there's some young fruits in there that I was expecting this to be a super old school leather chair, fireplace dram with, you know, those old sherry notes that I think some other distilleries of a 30-year-old caliber may have, but I don't know, maybe it's the quality of the cask or simply the ABV. It's good, yeah, a bit of those young fruits coming through, a lot of sultanas for me.
Yeah.
On the nose, Leo's getting a lot of butterscotch, palate, toffee, finish, caramel. Yeah, great descriptors there, mate.
Mm.
Hands up in the room. Has anyone actually been to Isla before? Okay, a few here.
On our honeymoon.
Oh, perfect.
Cool. And
Well, congratulations whenever that was. And anyone been to Bunnehaven? There you go. Is there anyone, like, do we need to paint a quick picture of where this distillery is in terms of Isla? Because it's the most remote. But when we say remote, it's quite tricky to get to. Obviously, when Isla started making whiskey, there was no roads, there was no bridges, there was none of that. It was simply you take a boat or a ferry, and none of the distilleries really talk to each other as well. They were kind of their own little pockets, mini islands themselves. But let me throw up some pictures of the distillery. Emma, have you ever been?
Tragically not. I have quite a shameful story of my trip to Scotland, which was I didn't drink whiskey when I was there. I'd been a nightclub bartender for years, and I was like, there's nothing worse than going home and smelling like cheap scotch. And yeah, so I went to Edinburgh for a music festival and just walked into Cadenheads and was like, what's that? That's cheap. I'll take that back home. So yeah, I've been to Scotland, but I've never been to a distillery, and quite heartbreaking. I have to remedy that. I have to take my husband because he doesn't like whiskey, so he can drive me around.
That's like the perfect deal.
No. Well, and the thing is, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure most of the distilleries in Scotland do what's called driver drams, where they're like little 30 ml or 50 ml bottles that they give to the people who are designated drivers, because you cannot drink and drive at all in Scotland. The limit's like 0.0, but they'll just hand out these little samples. And a friend of mine went, and his wife didn't drink whiskey, but she was given the samples, and he was like, "Yeah, double dosing." So yeah, it's a very moody, beautiful looking space. Yeah.
Can everyone see the image? I can't actually see you for some reason. So is that a yes, Emma?
Yes, that is.
What was that, sorry?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can all see it.
All right, cool. So remote part of Scotland on the west coast. It's an island. Most people, this is what they see. I shared a YouTube video in the email half an hour before the tasting. Bona actually commissioned a video called "The Sound of Isla," which is just recordings of the natural landscape. So if you haven't watched that video, it's only 2 minutes long. Highly recommend it. But for those who want the quick sort of tour, you end up on this rugged landscape. This is the single dirt road into the distillery. So you kind of make your way, when you get to the island, you go north. And once you take this road all the way down, you essentially end up over this little hill. And this is the first thing you see is a bunch of these white dunnage warehouses right by the water. And that dock that you see there is the one they use in their marketing. So the weather of the salt and the ocean, all that just comes right up to the distillery. So yeah, these are the typical angles. Everyone comes up to the wharf to take this kind of Instagram-esque kind of photo. But yeah, for me, going over the hill, and this is the first thing you see, the pile of barrels, the logo, and the different warehouse numbers on the top, is just such a welcome sight. And really the fact that it's only meters from the ocean, to me, is, I don't know, there's something beautiful and romantic about this scene. While I got the images going, this is what it looks like inside the warehouses, just stacked, massive sherry casks. They do other barrel types, all kinds of stuff, but yeah, big Oloroso sherry casks in the majority of them. And then they've got barrels. This is where you go do your tasting. So you come in, and Warehouse 9 is the famous one. So they always have different casks lined up, and depending on how wonderful the tour guide is on the day, they'll let you try all of them or just one. Sometimes you got to pay for a sample, sometimes you don't. Really depends on who's taking you through the tour. But yeah, it's just one of those awesome sites. And Warehouse 9 is kind of known as a little bit as the master distillers, sort of a private collections. That's the ones I always draw the face bottlings from and the special releases. So if you get a bit of time to rummage around that warehouse, it's something special, because there's some truly unique casks and whiskies maturing in there.
I did appreciate that one of the photos was an actual nice day in Scotland, the one that they get every year.
Yeah, I found that on someone posted on TripAdvisor of all places. So
I like to think I think Brooklady Distillery has a photo as well of like a beautiful blue clear sky. I like to think that every distillery was like, oh my God, we need to like take a photo of our distillery in the sunshine for the first time ever.
and then they never use it in their marketing. It's always the traditional Scottish weather.
That brooding, moody Outlander vibe that they're going for.
All right, shall
Yeah.
we number 40?
Yeah, whiskey number 2, the Bunnahabhain 40-year-old. Now I will say I poured this into my glass a little bit earlier and it smelled like pencil shavings, which is really cool and very, very weird. Now, this is actually not the only 40-year-old Bunnahabhain I've gotten to try, but this one is predominantly sherry cask again. So there's a bit of a funny thing about this one. So the original casks were sourced, obviously, yonks ago, from a really legendary wine and spirits merchant called J.G. Turney. And they filled them and forgot about them in the warehouses until the blending team was going through the ledgers and so warehouse ledgers and stuff like that, and was like, oh wow, okay, we've got some really old barrels out here. We should probably do something with them. Let's pull them out, see how they are. And so this is actually some of them have hit independent bottlers as well, which is how I tried mine through Summerolly. But yeah, they were like, well, you know, this is pretty cool, pretty special. There's not a lot of 40-year-old whiskey casually kicking around. Apart from, I would probably hazard a guess, Gordon and MacPhail are probably the only people who have barrels that are significantly older than that, because they were the only people who had the forethought and the money to buy and fill barrels during World War II. But yeah, so Bunnahabhain 40 is the oldest age expression. It is a core range, but obviously kind of a limited core range. There's not too many bottles you can get out of so many barrels without quite a few years of forethought. So, and kind of obviously for us in Australia, the idea of just losing track of a couple hundred or so barrels and just forgetting about them for 40 years is not really something that we quite consider as being normal business practices. But it's weirdly common to forget about barrels in Scotland. I got to try a whiskey that was independently bottled, and I was like, oh, it says there's 94 bottles came out of this barrel. Was it a tiny barrel? And they're like, no, it just leaked for 7 years. And they didn't realize for 7 years that this barrel was leaking significantly. And it was like, oh, okay, sure, So yeah, and obviously if you're making a lot of whiskey, it can happen. But yeah, I think this is definitely not a leaky barrel situation. This is definitely a positive forgot about it situation. And yeah, as I was saying before, it's a really cool, really interesting opportunity to try something that is quite up there in price and not super easily accessible.
Emma, you say core range.
Yeah.
If it's core range and 40 plus years old, I don't understand that.
So it's something that will be consistently available. So kind of when they came about it, when they thought about it, they were like, all right, we're going to bottle these and we're going to release them, but we're going to make sure that we can release them in such a way that we're still able to have, say they've got 30 or so year old barrels as well there, and they're like, all right, so if we make this batch last 10 years and then these barrels are going to be the next lot of 40-year-olds, we're just waiting for them to come to maturation. So it is a core range because it won't go away unless they decide.
They're going to keep producing 40-year-old.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they are going to keep producing 40-year-old whiskey. It's just there's not going to be a whole bunch of it. Yeah.
It's also yearly batched. So if that year produces only 2,000 bottles, and that's the global allocation for that year. Just to let you know, like we're the importers of Bunnehaven in Australia. We got 4 bottles this year. That's it.
What's the pricing?
I knew someone was going to ask me that question.
Yes, preparation was not there.
Give me 2 minutes. I believe
Approximately, without being held to it.
No, I've got it written here. It's about 3,500
Okay.
RRP,
Okay.
which is cheaper
think
than
it's
a lot of other 40-year-old whiskies as an original bottling. That's if you look at some other prices. So, but you were saying, sorry, man, interrupted.
I don't think it's as good as a 30-year-old. I think the 30-year-old's better.
I kind of agree with you. I think I like
I agree.
better. Yeah, I think there's just some fresh youthfulness. But there is a brightness to the 30-year-old and well-rounded. And Leo's brought up a great point. This one does have a bit of bourbon cask influence. It is again predominantly sherry, but there's a little bit of bourbon cask.
For me, this reminds me of Irish whiskey when it hits 40 years old, a Middleton. It becomes super tropical. I'm getting pineapples, papaya, and the sherry notes are starting to, as I was saying before, I was kind of expecting that from the 30-year-old. The 30-year-old held its ground, still tastes like a big, meaty, sherried whiskey. And this, it's gone the tropical route for me.
Yeah, this one's still like pencil shavings and mango skin for me. It's that like pithy, woody bitterness, which I kind of quite like, but me, it's been a bit odd. But no, I agree. I like the 30-year-old. And it just goes to show you that, like, if you keep pushing an aged whiskey, like, it doesn't mean it's going to get better. I will say, though, the other Bunnahabhain 40-year-old I tried tasted like green olives and mortadella ham. So this is definitely an improvement on that one. It was very bizarre. I felt like I'd walked out of an Italian deli. Tasty but weird.
For those who are lucky to do it, I think it was our pot of gold top shelf tasting early in the year. We had the artist series, the Bunnehaven 40-year-old, that retained all its sherry goodness, and that was so, I don't know, that was like a perfect 40-year-old in my mind. And you know, the luck of the draw, those casks probably spent a lot of time of their lives together and some time apart. But it's yeah, interesting how it's come together. Obviously, that was a single cask, and this is a bit of a batching of a couple of different casks. But yeah, it's also 41.9%. I think if the ABV was slightly higher, we'd get a little bit more bites and a bit more of that sherry spice come through. So it's just, yeah, I think that for me, if I was to point one thing out I don't like about it, is it's low ABV. You know, by Scottish standards, it only just crosses the line of being called whiskey technically still. But yeah, otherwise, you know, it's a fun tropical dram. Would I buy a bottle? I don't know. It's personal preference for everyone, I guess.
The bottle you give 48%
There's
on.
48, yeah.
That is a misspelling. It is
typo.
41.9%.
So I think as well, that's another thing that we don't consider, because obviously being in Australia, we're like, oh, well, like ABV goes up as it stays in the barrel. But in Scotland, it stays pretty consistent over time. But then what you'll see with actually quite a lot of distilleries is very common, is once a whiskey hits like the 30-year mark, the ABV in Scotland just starts plummeting. I had a 35-year-old Glenturret natural cask strength of 44%. They were like, we have to get this out now, or otherwise it will be water. Like, we have to get it out now. So that is a weird thing, is quite common for a lot of distilleries. And I would imagine most likely that this is, they have left these casks at natural cask strength, and the best, best it came to was the low ABV. So, they might have brought it down a little bit, but most likely it would have been the mid 40s at ABV naturally, which is just bonkers when you think about it. So yeah, it's really interesting, and that's kind of a nice little quirk. Every distillery as well has like the age at which it starts plummeting. So like for Glencairn, it's like 32 years. For Bunnahabhain, it'd probably be at that 30-ish year mark as well. So whereas other distilleries, it can hang on for ages and ages. I had a 29-year-old Macallan that was still like 52%, and I'm like, okay, cool. So yeah. Alrighty, we hop on to the next dram. The Fèis Isle 1989 Oloroso cask finish.
Does everyone know what Fèis Isle is before we kick off? Because we've got 2 special bottlings from them, but I figured might as well cover that ground if we haven't yet. Is that hands up if you have heard of it? No idea.
Oh, seems
All
like
right.
hands, yay. Did you want to chat about it, Ollie, or did you want me?
You go. You seem ready for it.
So Fèis Isle is a festival that they hold every year on Isla. It's the last week of May and the first week of June. And it initially started out about, I think it was 20 years ago now, 30 years ago. It started out as a music, cultural, dance festival. So there is still a lot of that goes on. There is traditional dancing, there is traditional Gaelic music, there is local artists, there's all sorts. And about 10 plus years ago, all the distilleries were like, well, we're culturally relevant to Isla, can we be a part of the festival? And so they started, Ardbeg was one of the first to jump on board, and now every festival, there's a different day for each distillery. So Bunnehaven Day is the 3rd of June every year at the distillery. I think Ardbeg Day is the last day of the festival. So, and that's when every distillery releases their Fèis Isle release, they bottle cool stuff. So obviously the Ardbeg ones are the ones we see most often, but we're starting to get our hands, and we're very excited to get our hands on the Bunnehaven Fèis releases. So they'll do a couple of different releases, and it's just cool, fun stuff that they have kicking about. It's experimental whiskies that they want to bottle just for the festival. And so, yeah, this one was actually a surprise release on the day of the festival, like literally on Bunnehaven Day. They were like, by the way, we have this whiskey as well, ta-da! And yeah, it's a really great way for the distilleries to kind of like showcase. It is the most visitor-centric thing. I've spoken to some of the guys who work at the distilleries, and they're like, well, you wake up on the first day of Fèis Isle Festival to find like 30 German tourists camping on your lawn because they can just do that, and they've set up tents. And this tiny island, 10,000 people just flood it every year for Fèis Isle. Obviously, the last few years have been a bit different, looked a bit different, but yeah, it's just a week and a bit of just fun and really celebrating Isla, separate from kind of the rest of Scotland, because they are quite a small culturally entrenched little space. It's since spawned the Campbelltown Festival, the Speyside Festival, and all these other ones, but Fèis Isle was really kind of the first whiskey oriented festival. But of course, there's other stuff that goes on as well. But yeah, they do special masterclasses, really cool interactive stuff. I believe Lagavulin does Smoky Cokey every year as well. It's their signature. Or Smoky Cokey floaties, I think like spiders, like ice cream and Coke and whiskey. It's great. If you've never tried it, it's delicious. But yeah, so it's really, really cool festival. Obviously, I think we'd all love to go one day, but yeah, it gets pretty mental. You know, it's the Super Bowl of smoky whiskey. So yeah, and Bunnahabhain released quite a few fun releases this year. They really just went at it with the whiskies that they had. This one was probably the most limited of all of the bottlings that I did for Facial. There was only 286 bottles for the world. That's it. So yeah, probably literally one cask, you know, cask strength, nothing happening to it. But yeah, so this spent most of its life in refill hogsheads, so American oak, ex-bourbon refill casks. And then it had I suppose you should call it a finish, but it spent 6 years in an Oloroso cask. So it really had a very long nap in an Oloroso cask to finish it off. So, you know, you're getting
a long nap.
A long nap. Just the kind of nap that you want to have, and then you'd wake up and you'd feel more tired after.
So a few people previous to this tasting have asked this question. I'm just going to explain it. So this year there's 4 Faish bottlings. The Bunnahabhain's got their normal labels. If you see a white label on the Bunnahabhain bottle, that's their Faish bottlings. Prior to COVID, you had to travel to the distillery on the June 3rd to get access and line up to get these bottles. If there was any left at the end of the day, they would throw up on their website in the last few years. Most of it sold in person. COVID happened, tourism died obviously all around the world, and then they were like, well, let's bring Isla to your living rooms. And that was the whole theme of the last 2 years. Bunnahabhain was part of a few other distilleries, this Faish at home concept, where you bought your virtual tasting kits, and they started still doing their yearly bottlings and then distributing it with their local or country distributors. This year, with Isla Festival coming back online, they decided to do a 2-prong approach and reward those who travel to the distillery, which is why the one that we're tasting now was announced on the day. The one that we're finishing at the end of this tasting, the Moyne, the Tokay finish. The Moyne, the Tokay finish, that was also distillery exclusive. And then the other 2 that they released for this year, the Abag Arag, which means Arag River. So it's and Bunnahabhain means mouth of the river. So like the Gaelic, if you translate it, just means whiskey of the mouth of the river that's bottled at that river. It's kind of a river face kind of whiskey. It's a bit weird, the naming convention there, but which was a port sherry blend. And then they also did the Calvados. So we were lucky as the importers for Australia to both get the Abag Arag and the Calvados cask for Australia. And super excited to say that the shipments actually landed like 3 days ago in Australia. So we'll be selling some of that whiskey and obviously going to all our partner retailers. If you want to get your hands on it, the other 2 that we're tasting tonight, which is why I grabbed them for this tasting, is they're just not available outside of the distillery. So I reached out to them. I said it was all sold out. And I said, hey, spoke to Julian and the master blender, and she's like, the Australian audience is keen on, these Faish bottlings. Can we get all 4? She said, we don't have enough to send the other 2, but we can at least send you 1 bottle each for a tasting. So that's why we're drinking it tonight, based on their generosity. So thank you to them. And yeah, what's everyone think of this Oloroso cask?
It's delicious.
Mm.
Absolutely delicious.
I think it's my favorite so far.
I will say I'm eyeing off the Canasta cask though when we get to that.
It looks like Coca-Cola.
It does. I love it.
Definitely.
No, it's really cool. And the other Faish bottlings that Ollie was talking about, the Calvados cask is, I would hazard guess, the first Calvados cask released ever from Bunahaven since the Scotch Whisky Association changed the rules last year. They are very strict about what kind of casks you can and can't use. So for example, anything that's held a fruit spirit or fruit liqueur or even like cider, illegal. You can't call it Scotch whiskey if you finish or mature anything in one of those casks. But they laxed it a little bit. Most of it's based on heritage use. So was it used in the past? Okay, it's appropriate. But they relaxed it so you can use tequila and Calvados casks now. So we're going to be seeing quite a few of those pop up. And I can confirm the Calvados cask tastes great. I'm upset at how...
Please can you ask him to ban ginger beer casks?
Ban ginger beer casks?
The stuff tastes so terrible.
I think the problem is there's so much terrible ginger beer out there that
Just
the barrels are
people are
just not good.
shutting the stuff out left, right, and centre, and it's just ruining Scotch.
I will say, have you ever tried Royal Jamaican ginger beer? No.
No.
All right. It used to be quite readily available in Australia until they changed the classification of it. It used to be a beer and it was like $8 a bottle. Then they changed the classification. They're like, well, technically it's a wine now. And so it went from $8 a bottle to $16 a bottle. And that's at a bar. It's not even like buying it at a bottle shop. So it doubled the price and essentially killed the import of this ginger beer into Australia. But it's from Jamaica. And I reckon if a distillery could get their hands on a whole bunch of Royal Jamaican ginger beer casks, it could actually be good. It could actually
No, I
be
recommend to sell ginger beer rather and leave the whiskey to something else.
maybe.
More
Yeah. I will say though, Glen Murray did a cider cask finish, which was distillery, like you could only get it at the distillery. And I managed to try it and it was delicious. And I was like, I'm so upset. It was like for Glen Murray, they're like, well, we can't legally sell it as whiskey. Like there's just a couple of bottles that if people are, super, super interested in. It was mental. We should be using apple cider casks for whiskey. I think it would just be amazing. But yeah, ginger beer casks, hit or miss.
I'm going to fire our label maker. We just spotted another tiny little mistake. It's not 454% ABV.
there is a point there.
Is there?
Just
Okay.
It's so tiny. We'll just call
Well,
that
the
picture error.
letter spacing needs to be just, but it is 45.4% ABV.
We have not given you all alcohol poisoning.
And then I was trying to work out what is this note I'm getting on the nose that I haven't got from the other two before it. And I'm just reading Leo's note and he said nuts on the nose. And for me, I'm getting walnuts.
I would say that plum pudding thing, go full plum. If you ever had umeshu, like it's that full umeshu, sweet, but not sweet, the very Japanese plum thing on the nose.
I'm getting that like on the palate, like plums boiled in syrup with like clove and spices, even white pepper. I don't know. There's something going on there it's a nice spicy funk from the Oloroso, I imagine.
Like maple syrup.
Yeah,
Like this. Real maple.
like proper Canadian maple syrup, not maple flavored.
Not corn water.
Yeah. My last trip to Canada, came back with like a case of maple syrup, just like gotta get the good stuff. But yeah. All right. Shall
What's
we
next?
head on to the? All right. I know I'm gonna say this wrong. Weymouth. Weymouth. Let's go with Weymouth. Let's just commit to that. So this is a independent bottling of Bunnahabhain. So Weymouth is a clan. So like you've got the Armstrong clan, Mackenzie clan, all that kind of stuff. So it's a group family. I don't want to say the word too much because I know I'm just gonna keep Weems.
I think it is Weems, yeah.
Weems. All right, let's go with Weems then. Sure. That way I'm not copping the blame for mispronouncing it. But yeah, so it's a independent bottling company based in Fife in Scotland. It was founded back in 2005 by a brother and sister duo. And they had William and Isabel, and they'd been wine blenders in France for a long time, but they have a long history with whiskey in their family, connections to Hague, blended whiskey and stuff like that. So for them, when they kind of came back from France, it made sense to take all of their knowledge and all of their talents and apply it to whiskey. So Isabel is actually the main selector. She does a lot of the nosing, the tasting, and all that stuff to pick the barrels. And she's very inspired by Charlie McLean's flavor wheel for whiskey. So that was kind of the approach that they wanted to take. And they predominantly bottle older whiskies. So they are very much, oriented towards the higher age statements, unusual casking and stuff like that. But yeah, so 1987, 30-year-old Weems malt. I believe this one is predominantly bourbon cask, maybe a bit of sherry.
Actually, no. I've got the bottle here, Emma.
Oh, you got it right there?
So couple things. At the back label, it actually says, if you feel moved to toast them, remember it's pronounced in brackets Weems. So
Weems. Right.
we should have actually just read the back
You
of the
couldn't have
label.
run with that. You made me mispronounce it. How many times?
I'm honestly, I didn't even know how to back label until 30 seconds ago. It's 46% ABV. What's interesting is each individual cask is named according to its flavors and aromas. This one is called Chestnut and Apple Chutney. Where's my camera? Hopefully you can see a little bit there. 1987 release, 46%. And at the very bottom here, it says in capital letters, a rich butt with sweet, sour, and savory notes that keeps you salivating. It's bottled in 2018, 622 bottles. And basically bears their signature. Fun fact that I've also just recently learned is world-renowned whiskey expert writer Charles McLean is on their tasting panel. So he approves a lot of their whiskies they go into here. So he's obviously stretched across quite a few different endeavors in the whiskey industry, but when he does put his name to it, generally means tasty stuff. So good to have his backing on this as well. But I think let's just judge the whiskey on its whiskey.
Yeah, absolutely. If it is a sherry butt, it must have been a very quite closed off cask, which I'm kind of thrilled about. It's not overbearing. The chestnut thing is bang on. I'd almost err towards like apricot muesli bars, like stone fruits. But yeah.
I'm not getting the apple. I'm getting the stone fruits.
Yeah.
Yay or nay, people? Thumbs up, thumbs down.
Yes. Yeah.
All right.
Ooh, in the middle.
A bit of drama from Howard.
Oh yeah, I will say this is probably my favorite so far.
I find it a bit musty almost on the nose.
Okay, like old closets. Yeah. That might just be, I suppose, maybe a little bit touch of old bottle effect. This is what, 30 years old, 1987 distilled, bottled when, Ollie?
2018.
18. Yeah, 4 years, old bottle effect, maybe. Bit soon for it to come on.
This is just my personal preference. There's two types of Bunnahabhain that I like. One is you sip on it for hours and you kind of savor it and its complexities and its subtleties. And then you have a dram where you just like pour yourself a big solid pour and you just sit back and you just like take a big mouth. I call it the gulp. And then this, I think, fits in that category. Same as a Bona 18. I feel like the richness and the sugars and the sweetness, I don't know, this does something when you have a lot more in your mouth rather than sipping on it. enjoy it more drinking it that way than sipping on it, if that makes sense.
I call them my straw whiskies, the kind of whiskey where I could just stick a straw in the bottle and be done. Leo, you've never tried a chestnut. Oh, all right. Yeah, it's hard to describe. Whenever I get chestnut flavor in a whiskey as well, it's always that American department store Christmas chestnut. So if you've ever been in the States during Christmas time, I don't know what it is that they pump through the AC or whatever, the heaters. It's this like, just this Christmas smell, and it's like nutmeg and chestnuts roasting over a fire and cinnamon, and it permeates everything from like November until right up to the end of December, and then it's like hard no, we've moved on. But yeah, it's like, I think when you taste chestnut in a whiskey, it's very much that like aroma of chestnut, and rather than the actual nut itself, which is quite rubbery, unless it's like really heavily toasted. But yeah, Leo, definitely go out to your like nearest Bed Bath and Body Works and pick up like a Christmas smell. It's the best I can offer you as a comparison. But yeah, I agree with you, Ollie. This is definitely like it won't last long in my house. Yeah. All right.
What's really cool about this is you can still pick up, this kind of whiskey on the auction market around that $600, $550, once duties and excise is paid. I think that's something special about these lesser known independent bottlers is, yes, your Lagavulins, your Macallans, your Ardbergs, the price is skyrocketing these days, but for sort of the next tier of distilleries, whether there's the Band and Springbank's obviously in that category as well, but the next level down of these next tiered whiskies, you can get a 31-year-old whiskey for $600, where the equivalent at the distillery is 2-3 times the price. And this is a single cask and it's guaranteed. So, that's why I enjoy independent bottling so much, as well as you get to try whiskies from 1987. It's a little bit, it's pricey. Obviously, these are all top shelves, but it's only more accessible compared to like the 40-year-old or this next whiskey, which I will tell you the price after we've tried it.
So you can let it break all of our hearts. Yeah, so shall we pop onto the Canasta cask, Bunnahabhain, 1980. I'm so excited about this.
This is the most Coca-Cola looking Bona I've ever seen.
There was a Japanese whiskey released years ago, and they were literally like, yeah, we added lots of caramel coloring. So it was super dark. It was black. It was pitch black, and it just tasted of caramel coloring. But yes, I know what you mean, but I'm like coming from a space of like, I've drunk whiskey that is black as my soul. But yeah, so I remember when we were speaking to Julianne for the tasting that using the Canasta cask was one of her favorites that she's done. So Canasta is what would be called a cream sherry. So when you talk about cream sherries, they're sherries that are a blend of different grapes, or like a blend of different styles. So Palomino grapes make most types of sherry, your Oloroso, your Manzanilla, your Fino, all that kind of stuff. Those are Palomino grapes, and then PX sherry is made with just Pedro Jimenez grapes. Canasta is a blend of Palomino and Pedro Jimenez sherry grapes. It's produced in the Jerez region of Spain, and the fruit's grown in a couple of vineyards nearby. And the primary producer is a company which is the most Spanish name ever. They're called Williams and Humbert Bodega. So they are the predominant producer of Canasta sherry for the entire European market. They're kind of the main ones doing it. So when we talk about cream sherries, it's mostly like a lot of it is kind of the stuff that you use for cooking. You know, you go to the supermarket and like, oh, cream of sherry or whatever, because I need to make a cake with sherry or something in it. But Canasta is a little bit more nuanced in style, and it is like designed to be drunk neat, like a regular sherry is. So obviously, as you can tell by the color, and I'm sure by the aroma, which I can smell from a mile away at the moment, sitting on my desk, this is a really long finish in Canasta. It is the second oldest whiskey we're trying. It's 36 years old, 49.5%. So it did hold up pretty well over time in the cask. But yeah, definitely dipping below that 50% natural cask strength.
This reminds me more of a Glenrothes than it does of a Bunnahabhain.
It reminds me of like Glentorkas. If you've
Yeah,
ever
that
had
too.
like an old sherried Glentorkas, because it's like not quite Christmas cake. There's something to it where you're like, this Christmas cake was dropped on the ground, so it's earthy.
Yeah, like it's obviously got dark. I don't know. I'm getting dried apricots, a bit of dark chocolate, that moldy wine cellar. You know, you can taste the Dunnage warehouse in this whiskey.
Reminds me of another Bunnahabhain I had from an independent bottler. And my tasting note, and this is quite similar, my tasting note for that one was a fisherman's leather coat. So like, you know, think about like the sea salt spray and the weathering, but then you've got the meatiness of the leather, you know, like that kind of savoriness, but then like that sweetness is coming through at the end as well. It's amazing.
So 1980s distilled, 36 years old, so bottled in 2017. Only 1,220 bottles produced. On the front of the label, it's got a, let me just hold it up. As you can see, there's a tiny bit of tasting notes on the bottom there. Figs, toffee, dark chocolate aromas invite you for the first sip. That must be the nose. And on the palate saying espresso, nuts, sea air, unfold and lingering dark fruit and oak. What do we think, people? Good, bad, nay?
Leo's not into it. A bit too oaky and astringent. I can understand. Yeah, I know. Fisherman's leather coat. How would I possibly know? Look, I'll let you in on a little secret. I have a literature background, and I like to think that, you know, it's what I would taste if I licked some poor bloke's coat. Like, it's not my bizarrest tasting note. I was telling someone today that my unicorn Lacheg whiskey, if I ever find it again, I remember distinctly I was like, oh, this tastes like the Library of Alexandria, just like dusty, sandy papyrus leather books. And they're like, you're so weird. But, you know, but yeah, exactly. Like, sometimes you can taste an aroma. Adrian, this is your favorite. Just takes the pip over the first one. Yeah, it's my favorite too. I like to think the more whiskeys that I've drunk in my career, the more of a classical old boy palate I get. I'm like, I just want, you know, just an old boy whiskey that, you know, probably saw a Paxaret cask or something like that.
So I think this is the type of old school sherry that just isn't produced anymore. So you either like it or you don't. I think that's simple. I can't think of any modern Scottish distilleries that are producing like 10-year-olds of this caliber. It's just the sherry is just not available anymore than to leave the casks, right? And the other thing is just each time I go back to it, it changes on my palate. I don't know, I'm going to leave, you know, half my sample to breathe and maybe come back in an hour's time, because in 3 micro sips, it's already changed its flavor significantly for me. It's gone from sweet to like dirty old sherry, and now I'm getting like peaches and I don't know, other things there that just weren't there in my first 2 sips. So I don't know, there's a degree of complexity that, or a layer that the others that we've had tonight just haven't had. So for me, it's winning on that regard.
It really reminds me of, I don't know how familiar you guys are with Paxaret, which was a style of sherry produced literally just to give barrels that sherry flavoring kind of stuff. Essentially, they would just like pressure wash the inside of barrels with Paxaret until the practice was banned by the Scotch Whisky Association in the 70s or 80s. They were like, nah, you can't use it anymore. Paxaret's not sherry. This is not like okay. Stop it. So a lot of kind of the older sherry cask whiskey that we have can have a lot of Paxaret flavoring in it, and or were Paxaret casks. Apparently, I hear word there's a Tasmanian gentleman who has his hands on some actual Paxaret that you can try, and it's kind of widely agreed that not using it anymore is a bad idea because the flavor profile is just so distinctly different. And this is kind of like a perfect example of that old school sherry that we just don't get as much anymore because of the sherry casks we're using and the quality that we're using nowadays. So please drink more sherry so we have better casks. I ply my husband with so much fortified wine because he loves it, and I'm like, sweet, need the barrels. So yeah.
He's doing his part for the whiskey industry.
He is, he's truly a hero deep down. But yeah. All right, shall we head on to the last whiskey of the night?
Let's do it.
Yeah. So this is the only Moyne on the tasting. Yeah, all the grannies who are drinking sherry are, slowly dwindling. We need to get the young people into it. If they can get into their Aperol spritzes, they can be drinking sherry highballs or sherry spritzers or God knows what. There's more sherry. But yeah, so the only Moyne that we have on the tasting tonight, again from Facial Festival, as we were saying before, they do always try and put out at least one Moyne expression as part of their Face releases. It is something that we don't see anymore. There was a core Moyne release a very, very long time ago, and tragically, we just won't be seeing it again in the future, which is really sad. There will still be like expressions like I'm absolutely going to butcher this, but the Toichekaga, which means smoked twice or second smoked. So there will still be like lightly smoked, lightly peated expressions, but a proper Moyne will just be for limited releases, cool expressions and stuff like that. So this was finished for a little over a year in a Tokai, or I say Tokaji, but Tokai casks from Hungary. So Tokai is a white wine style. It's pretty much identical to like botrytis wines that we grow and make here in Australia. So it's made with grapes that have been affected by noble rot. So there's 6 different grape varieties that are grown in Eastern Europe, Hungary, Slovakia, that can be used for this style of wine. And the most used one is called Ferment. I hope I'm saying that right. It's spelt ferment, so I hope it's close enough. Actually, Ollie, you should probably be taking the pronunciation on this one.
My favorite fact about this is that the Tokai wine is part of Hungary's 28 wine regions. Like you think France and Italy and Spain is diverse, and you go to Germany, you go to Austria, and then you're like, oh, that's it for like European wine. And then you go to Hungary if you've ever been, and you're like, oh, let's try one of our many. And you're like, how many do you have? 2 or 3? And then like, no, we got 28 in this tiny micro country, you know, a third or a quarter of the size of like New South Wales. Is just rich and diverse, but the Tokaj region is pretty much where the Prince of Transylvania, so Dracula, is from. Like, this is the wine that Dracula would have drank, and then the cask would have then been shipped over somehow and ended up in Scotland at Islay on this random dirt road to Bunnehaven distillery to mature, and you know, it works.
Probably not the exact same cask, but
No, I like to think it is.
the intention behind there. Yes, I'm sure that's what Bram Stoker had in mind. Yeah, so I love your the notes there, Leo. The moderately peated sweet cask finish. It definitely has.
Before you can make a suggestion, if you've been saving a little bit of all the other ones before we taste the smoky one, you go back and retaste the other one. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to enjoy them.
That's fair. I do always save mine for like another day when I'm just like sitting down and it's just me. Because yeah.
Should I just put like elevator music on for 5 minutes while Howard goes back and finishes?
I don't know. The countdown clock.
But the last one is quite smoky, so if you're not going to be able to go back and retaste them if you saved a bit.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to launch the poll soon. But before I do, maybe in your comments, do you want to tell us your favorite non-smoky whiskey of tonight? Curious to hear your feedback. Emma, do we cover why Bona is predominantly a non-smoky whiskey when the rest of Islay is? Like, that, have we covered that history or?
I'm not sure if I did, but I can go over it briefly now. It's really just the way it's always been done. So Bunnehaven was started to be a blending whiskey. Like most of the distilleries built during the time, it was, we need a whiskey for blending. They didn't need peated whiskey. So it actually still goes into Cutty Sark, and it used to go into Famous Grouse as well. But they needed it. They just needed like a neutral, sherried, unpeated whiskey that they could produce a lot of. So they used Bunnahabhain for it. And yeah, they just kept with it. They were like, why change a good thing that works for us? Until obviously, yeah, peer pressure. It was like, when are you going to make a smoky whiskey? And they're like, all right, fine, we'll give it a crack.
So we're in the 1800s, and this island is really hard to get to, and people have built whiskey distilleries there, and there's no trees, so they need a peat. You know, they need to somehow dry their barley, so they use peat instead of wood, like they do on the mainland. And then comes along this rich money, and they're like, let's build a distillery on this remote island to make bulk whiskey for blends, rather than on the mainland. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. It feels a bit
Counterintuitive.
But yeah, then I don't know, maybe because there were so many distilleries that said whiskey tastes good made there. But yeah, they went the non-traditional route. Did they smoke their peat on the mainland, and was that mainland peat then?
I believe that Bunnehaven, even in the early days, had peated malt coming in from the mainland. So the dock that you could see in the photos, that was used predominantly to ship barley in and then ship whiskey out, up until 1993, when they were like, oh, we have roads and bridges, we don't need to ship things anymore. So yeah, so they would have been bringing in quite a bit of the malt, but yeah, I don't think they would have been using any of the malting houses on the island, and I don't believe they had their own malting house. They might have at one point, but I haven't come across the information. But yeah, it was really just a blending whiskey, and I think as peated whiskey became more popular across Islay, and people were making it in the very traditional style by using peat to dry the grains, and some of the other distilleries, I think Bunnehaven kind of looked at that and was like, well, you're just making us more unique. Like, we stand out more because we're not a peated whiskey distillery. And you know, they kind of clearly worked. I would argue they are definitely one of the more well-known distilleries on the island. Just in terms of they've been around for a very long time. Even the 12-year-old Westering Home release back in the 1970s, the classic 12-year-old has been around a very long time. So it works for them. And, you know, would I love to see more peated Bunnahabhain? Absolutely. And this wine is just magnificent, smoked vanilla slice. But you know, it is what it is, and you know, it's hard to find Bunnahabhain that I don't love. So yeah.
There's a savory note that's coming through for me. Like I get the sweet, I get the floral that we talked about. There's a little bit of citrus, but there's a meatiness. I don't know. I can't put it yet.
Prosciutto fat.
Yeah, it is got a deli vibe to it.
Mm.
Does everyone like peated whiskies here? Okay.
Oh,
good mix. This isn't like, I think, in the category of like your traditional peats, especially from Isla, it feels quite outside of it. But are we enjoying this whiskey?
Mm.
For me, and I think we had it recently at one of the whiskey sponge tastings, the Edredor and Bellichin, which is their peated malt, or even some of the Lechegs that we've had, the 22-year-old PX. It's this combination of sweet and smoky that, I don't know, to me, easily makes some of the best whiskey in the world, just smoke and sweet. I don't know how to explain it. It works for my palate. This doesn't fit in that category, but I like it very much because of it's not that, it's the savory, and I'm getting a little bit sweet, but the more I have it, I don't know. It's a random dram I need to sit on for a while and dissect. It's but I like whiskey like this. It gets you thinking.
Yeah, I think obviously the trend of heavily sherry cask, heavily peated whiskies is booming, and with good reason, because it's one of the best combinations ever. It's like chocolate with sea salt on it. It's, you know, that sweet and salty at the same time. But I think that we need to see more white wine cask smoky whiskies. Kilchoman did a Sauternes cask a couple of years ago, which was spectacular. I don't even like Kilchoman that much, but I was like, I kind of want a bottle of this. And I think it just brings out that funkiness, especially like Sauternes, like Takai, like the Tritus Semillon casks and stuff like that. Just brings out like a funkiness in the smoke. And especially if you've got like a really either a really soft peat whiskey, like even an Ardmore or something like that, or if you've got like a really sharp smoke like Laphroaig and stuff like that. I would kill to see Laphroaig in like a Sauternes cask. But yeah, I think we need to be using more fortified whites and like white port as well. I'm not a big fan of Fino, but Fino works surprisingly well with peated whiskey. There was that Balakin Fino, which is so good.
Before I share the results, Michael, good question. Are you getting an allocation 30-year-old? A little bit of insight. Basically, we could get a very small allocation of the 30-year-old, or we can get a larger allocation of the slightly, I think, I prefer the 25-year-old and larger quantities. So more Australians could drink more Bona 25. It was like way more Bona 25 or a tiny allocation of the 30. So we said, let's go for getting as much. Sorry, I got the dog barking in the background. Well, he wants to go out for a walk, but yeah, we decided let's get as much 25 in right now, and then but there is plans hopefully in the near future to get some 30-year-old. What I was going to say is, before I share the results, so Buna's got, obviously it's a big sherry focus, it's an unpeated Isla distillery, but but for us tonight, we've tried some diverse casks. The whole point of their face releases is they've got their core range of their whiskey, occasionally some port, some sherry in there as well. But you know, that's they stick true to their sherry unpeated route. And then these face releases they go completely left of field, and it's not meant to be the best of Bunnahabhain. It's to show you the showcase. The spirit is so versatile, it's diverse, it can work in so many different things regardless of age. I would really like to see this Tokay cask with a peated and unpeated side by side. Even if it's a 10-year-old or something, they should do that. That's my suggestion to them, is because like if I've tried it now, I've liked it, but like, what if the unpeated version is better than the Moyne? We don't know, and maybe that's an opportunity for next year's face, is to pick two casks that are almost identical, one peated and unpeated, because I think Bona just throws these Moynes out every now and then, but it's just because obviously what was available and what's ready to drink at the time. But they should be showcasing them side by side. That's something I'd love to see from them. But from the audience, we've done a few of these top shelf tastings before. Are you enjoying these vertical or these deep dives into one particular distillery? Some of our other top shelves are like, let's pick a theme, like a country, like we did top shelf Tasmanian last week. And a few other things.
Area.
Yeah, so
I think these top shelf ones like we've done today with some of the high end ones are fantastic.
So we got Mortlock coming up soon. I've got Lecheg, I've got Klein Leash, I've got Ben Runas, basically all the stuff in Johnny Walker. I'm dissecting it because I think some of the independent bottlings of what those distilleries release are really cool. But yeah, if there's a particular distillery that you want us to do a top shelf in, let me know and I will go hunt those bottles down, because that's half the fun.
Yeah, we absolutely love for you guys to, throw suggestions of what you kind of want to see us do with these, more higher end tastings, because we can, wrangle something, more interesting than and less accessible if we get the chance to. And it's a great opportunity to try unusual things. But yeah.
So those are the results. The
Three-way tie.
It is a three-way tie. So what's interesting, as I mentioned, the Weems is about 550, 600 Aussie. The Bunna 40s, you 3.5 sort of view. The 1980s 36-year-old is the same price as a Bunna 40. Completely sold out. You can maybe find it on auction sites. Maybe one random retailer in Europe might have it, but yeah, it's at 3.5. Even I saw it for $4,000 Australian landed here, so it's getting up there in terms of price. But yeah, interesting that the two face obviously it was a single one vote here, just didn't rank, but the Bunna 40 equally with the, I don't know, maybe Bona at 30 years old is the magic number.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We can maybe use this as leverage. Get us more Bona 30. But yeah, no, that it really surprised me, because I've been a fan of the 25 over the 40, but 30 is a nice middle ground.
Any other questions, guys? Feedback?
Pick our brains for anything.
Tim, when you and your partner were in the distillery, did you get to do the whole tour and visit Warehouse 9?
So we, I think, had 10 days going around Scotland and visited, I think, 8 distilleries.
11.
11. Okay.
I did the driving, I remember. But at this one, I think we kind of got there by accident, and they actually weren't doing tours, but we saw, or they weren't doing like door visits.
Yeah.
They only did tour groups, and we saw a tour group leave, so we saw what door they came out of, so we were like, oh, we'll just go in there. And they're like, oh, like, how did you come in here? So they did end up giving us some tastings, but yeah, they don't normally kind of take just random visitors. Well, they didn't. That was 8 years ago, so that was fun.
What I'm hearing is a mission impossible. You broke into Bunnahabhain.
Yeah, but it did happen, because I don't know if you can see that. That's Tim in front of the distillery. And funnily enough, I have like the exact, this is off my Facebook, that's the photo I took, and it's hard to see, but it's pretty much the exact photo of what you showed of the distillery with the casks out front. And
there was a keyword mentioned there. You said you accidentally got there. It's the most remote distillery. At what point did you like?
Well, not accidentally got there, like we wanted to visit it, but we didn't realize they don't just take visitors without a tour group. So we accidentally actually managed to get into it by seeing a tour group come out.
And now that you visited, highly recommend or pass for people in the future?
No, we thoroughly enjoyed. Well, I certainly did. Important to take a driver.
Yeah.
How much do you remember of it?
I think Howard was asking how much you remember of it. Is there any clouding of judgment?
We've got the photos.
Yeah.
I do have one of Tim, was it at Delmore?
Yeah.
There was like a wooden stag carving, and he's like leaning on it like this, just like completely.
So in our case, Maria got the tastings, and then she got to have a sip, and then I got to finish both mine and hers. So it worked well.
My first time to Speyside was like photos up until 11 a.m. and then it's like pictures of the ground for half an hour, and then there's no more photos for the rest of the day. So yeah, I don't know what I was thinking, but that we might as well call it a night, guys. Feel free to kick on for a few more minutes if you got any other questions, but I might end the recording there for those at home watching it later. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks again for joining our top shelf tasting. Our next one, like I mentioned, is Mortlach Distillery, and we've got a few others coming in the works. Actually, this just arrived the other day. Because you're like Isla, I basically bought the entire range of all the whiskey exchange and whiskey show bottlings from the last couple of years. So this is a 41-year-old blend, which is essentially a famous grouse. That's Macallan in there. I've tried it already. It's delicious. I've got a 20-year-old Ardbeg from a previous
I'm
year.
excited about that.
What else is there? There's a 28-year-old Ben Riach. I don't know. The price was okay. It was a late night purchase, so I decided.
I assume it's here for a tasting.
Yeah, this is one of our next top shelves. There's an 18-year-old Ardbeg in there.
A hard life being Ollie.
What else is there? This is undisclosed 20-year-old Speyside.
Ooh,
So-
most likely Glenfarclas.
I think. Yeah. I'd say there's a 50% chance there. And the last one is a 19-year-old Bunahaven.
Very funky labels, like it just doesn't look like whiskey.
It comes with I didn't bring them 3D glasses.
Oh wow.
So each of these labels you can actually put on the 3D glasses. The red blue ones are the old school yesteryear, and yeah. So there's one more bottle from this lineup that is another Ardbeg that I can't find. I'm refusing to pay triple price secondary market for it. So I've got some leads. I'm trying to get that still. If not, there is some backups here, but that's probably one of the next tastings we'll kick off a top shelf, because these are just awesome caliber of whiskies. And as fan of Isla, if you're all in here, keep an eye out for that. We'll let you know when it comes out.
Thank you, guys. That's been fantastic tasting.
I'm glad.